Hello and welcome to the Neighbourhood Justice Centre's speaker series. I am Alicia Ashcroft and I'm a project officer here at the Neighbourhood Justice Centre, or known as the NJC. To begin the presentation, we have Brooke Alford, and she is a project and policy advisor in the Program Innovations team at the NJC, and she is the project manager for the eRecovery trial. Before moving into her current role, Brooke was a court registrar for 14 years and has been with the NJC for 11. Brooke is a firm believer in therapeutic justice and the justice system's ability to positively impact the well-being of those who come in contact with it. Brooke will be followed by Dr. Stuart Ross. Stuart is Enterprise Professor of Criminology in the School of Social and Political Sciences at the University of Melbourne. His current research interests include the use of digital applications in criminal justice and crime prevention, and preventing and responding to child sexual exploitation through trauma-informed and disruptive policing and multi-agency collaboration. Dr. Ross teaches in the discipline of criminology and supervises a range of graduate and postgraduate students. He's worked closely with Brooke and other members at the NJC, as the University of Melbourne is a partner on this project. After Dr. Ross speaks, we will then have Mathew Cocomazzo. Mathew has a master's in psychology and has been working with the Neighbourhood Justice Centre for the last 8 years. He has occupied a dual role as the team leader of the client services team, and that's our support service team, and he is also a drug and alcohol clinician. Mathew spent the last 20 years in public and private settings working with people presenting with addiction and mental health concerns. I will now hand over to Brooke. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for that introduction, Alicia, and thank you all for coming today to hear about our findings from our eRecovery trial. As Alicia said, my name is Brooke Alford and I'm the project manager for the trial. Today I'll speak briefly about eRecovery, its origins and features, as well as how we trialled it at the NJC. Stuart Ross will follow me, who'll provide some context in terms of the digital in the forensic AOD treatment space and relapse prevention theory. He'll also speak about how eRecovery trial unfolded, the evaluation findings, and what this could mean for the future of digital apps in the court. Lastly, Mathew Cocomazzo will talk about the clinical outcomes of the trial, as well as sharing the implications of the trial in practice. Next slide, please, Alicia. So what is the eRecovery program? eRecovery is a smartphone-based relapse prevention app. The eRecovery program was designed for people recovering from drug and alcohol dependency. It is specifically intended to strengthen a person's autonomous motivation, build their coping competence, and provide social connection. eRecovery was developed by the University of Wisconsin in the United States in 2011. From 2015, eRecovery was trialled widely in a range of US drug courts. Multiple clinical studies demonstrated its effectiveness in both reducing relapse and keeping clients in treatment longer. Chess Health commercialised the app in 2017 and it is now deployed in more than 50 organisations in the US and internationally. The NJC's trial of eRecovery program was the first time it had been used in Australia. So there are two main components of the eRecovery program. There is the Connections app, which is available for download by the client to the smartphone. And then there's the companion app and a web-based dashboard for clinicians and case managers. So by downloading the app to their smartphone or accessing the dashboard using a desktop computer or laptop, a clinician or case manager can communicate with their clients and track their progress between appointments using the companion portion of the eRecovery program. So there are various functions available to clients through the Connections app. I'll just go through them briefly. So there's the daily check-ins. So clients are asked to log in every day and respond to a question about their confidence in their recovery that day. The surveys, clients are asked to complete surveys, and they can track their responses to survey questions visually through graphs. NJC clients were asked to complete a brief addiction monitor survey weekly, and this asks clients about their use of drugs and alcohol over the past 7 days, and a range of protective and risk factor questions. There's a messaging function within the app, so messages can occur between clients who use the app and also between a client and their clinician. There are also discussion boards. Clients can set medication and appointment reminders for themselves within the app. There are provisions to record recovery goals and motivations, as well as to journal within the app. There was a facility for content, so a variety of educational and practical resources can be tailored by clinicians and uploaded for clients to access through the app. So this included things like PDF documents, audio files, and links to websites. The app has an inbuilt support locator, so clients can access a tailored list of support services available in their local area. Yeah, we've got the right slide there now. The app also has a beacon function. Clients can use this when they're in need of immediate support. So by pressing the beacon icon, it would bring a client to a page which allows them to view their motivations and goals for recovery, access relaxation tools and contact supports, including their clinician. And finally, there was a high risk location feature. So clients can enter into the app locations where they feel that they're at an increased risk of using drugs or alcohol. And then if the client goes near that self-identified high-risk location, they will receive an alert from the app and be given the option to view contact or contact a support, including their worker. But activating this feature was an optional for NJC clients. They didn't have to utilise that function. So features of the companion app, which is what the clinicians use. So clinicians can receive immediate notification to client responses to surveys. They can use this information to respond immediately or as a basis for discussion at scheduled appointments. This provides clinicians with dynamic updates on risks and protective factors and allow them to tailor their treatment accordingly. Clinicians can set up appointments with clients through the app and also send medication and other reminders to clients. The medication and other reminders can be done individually to each client or to a group of clients at once. So the NJC trial occurred between February 2019 and February 2022. From the outset, NJC worked with researchers at the University of Melbourne to assess the effectiveness of the app in relapse prevention and the potential for broader use by other problem-solving and therapeutic justice programs. The program was offered to any clients who are experiencing drug and alcohol dependency and accessing NJC AOD services or serving a community corrections order that was being supervised at the NJC. There was a comprehensive signed informed consent process undertaken by clients to participate in the trial. A client's participation in the trial was voluntary and they could cease use at any time with no impact on the AOD treatment services they were receiving or impact on compliance with their CCO. Clients needed a smartphone and mobile data or Wi-Fi connection to use the app. We had some low-cost smartphones available to loan to clients who wanted to take part in the app but didn't have their own phone. A Wi-Fi hotspot at the NJC and Woolworths essential vouchers were also available to enable clients to purchase mobile phone data to use the app. So now that you've got that basic overview, I'll now pass on to Stuart, who will continue talking about the findings of the trial.
It as well. Okay, so here. What I wanted to do was to talk about some of the findings out of the evaluation, but also to try and in a sense locate where eRecovery sits in relation to the range of digital developments that are starting to have impact on the justice system, and talk a little bit about the theoretical model that underpins its design. So if I could have the next slide, please. Okay, it might be helpful just to try and locate eRecovery in the wider landscape of digital tools and technologies that have been increasingly becoming available to support justice activities. compared with the e-health and the e-mental health sectors, the justice system's been relatively slow to adopt digital platforms for service delivery, but I think in the last 5 years, we've seen an increasing number of these tools being rolled out. So we see things like apps that are being created to support activities like community offender supervision and compliance monitoring. So there's one that you might want to go and have a look at called Outreach Smartphone Monitoring that allows remote facial recognition, facial and voice recognition combined with a mobile phone dongle that allows blood alcohol to be monitored remotely as well. There are apps to deliver rehabilitation programs in prison and in the community. So they're things like Breaking Free Online or Socrates 360. We've seen the rollout in the last couple of years of digital tablets as a feature of a lot of new prison designs. And so these tablets are providing a platform for education, rehabilitation, reintegration and facility management functions within prisons. We can also see instances of digital apps being marketed directly via the online app marketplaces to individuals. So we can see things like Tellmate Getting Out and inmate communication services or apps that allow people to send emails and money and photos to people in prison. There's an online app for re-entry support called Hope for Prisoners. And then we also see corrections clients with health or mental health issues being engaged with apps that have been primarily designed as part of e-health or e-mental health systems. And I think what we see in eRecovery is an example of that latter category. So the practice landscape's being changed, even if somewhat slowly, and it gives rise to a number of quite significant challenges for people involved in the justice sector. So it raises questions about how we identify good quality mobile applications that are likely to yield genuine benefits for service users. It raises the question about how we make mobile phone applications available to forensic clients and motivate them to use them, and how we adapt forensic treatment approaches so that they'll work effectively in conjunction with mobile applications. So what I wanted to do was just to have a look very briefly at the theoretical basis that underpins eRecovery. Now, most of the eRecovery is a derivation of an app which, when it was originally designed, was called HS, and most of the literature on the theoretical underpinnings of it relate to HS, so that's why I'm using that terminology in this slide. And it's an interesting example to look at because it represents an attempt to translate some practice models which should be very familiar to AOD practitioners into the form of a mobile phone app. So, you know, I think this is an example of something which we're going to increasingly see, which is attempts to take practice models which have hitherto been delivered pretty much on a face-to-face basis and to make them available to people through various forms of digital interfaces. So the idea about relapse prevention theory is now this is more complex than I'm giving a very kind of superficial overview here, but some of the kind of key ideas in relapse prevention theory are that relapse results both from immediate determinants and from covert antecedents. And so some of the things that we see built into eRecovery are ways of identifying high-risk situations and identifying the onset of a violation of abstinence, of getting people to think about their lifestyles and their urges and their cravings. Relapse prevention theory sees relapse as a process rather than an event. And so one of the key ideas behind eRecovery is that it's an app that you use every day. And so rather than as a kind of tool to go to in a crisis, it's trying to get relapse prevention as, built into people's lives on a day-to-day basis. Relapse prevention theory says that people in recovery need to have an active recovery and prevention plan. And so eRecovery is a way of putting that active recovery and prevention plan into a form that in effect users can carry around with them and go to whenever they need them. And then finally, recovery requires social support from significant others. And so some of the things that we see in eRecovery are about using the tool to build social networks that users can use in order to assist them through their recovery process. Okay, so this is just some data on the trial participants. One of the things I think it's important to acknowledge in this evaluation is that eRecovery was offered to quite a number of people, only some of whom agreed to take part in the trial. So this is data on the engagement and use of 31 participants that we were able to get fairly comprehensive information about. So we had 13 female and 18 male participants, 16 of whom were engaged through the NJC client services and 15 came in through the corrections pathway. Typically, they were people who had quite long-term drug dependencies. Around 1 in 5 of them didn't own a mobile phone when they came into the trial. And so even though some of the people who did own mobile phones typically reported a reasonably high level of use, so they were familiar with mobile phones, there were instances of participants who came into this pretty much cold as far as mobile phone usage was concerned. The data that we're showing here is when people first enrolled in the trial, they were asked to do a couple of questionnaires. This is the PHQ-9 questionnaire, which is essentially measuring anxiety and depression symptoms. And what you can see there is that over half of all the trial participants were in the moderately severe to severe range for depressive symptoms. And I think this is a really important attribute of the participants in the trial, was that they were not just people with long-term drug dependency, but people with quite high levels of symptomatology in terms of particularly anxiety and depression. And so one of the things that I think it's important to see this as in terms of the applicability of eRecovery is that it was an intervention which was able to be used with people who represented quite a challenging population to work with in terms of relapse recovery. Right. So one of the things that we were really concerned about in the trial was how people came to eRecovery and what factors were important in their continuing to use it over an extended period of time. So, you know, everybody would be familiar with the idea that drug relapse or drug recovery from drug use is a process which extends over a very long period of time. And so if we want to see eRecovery as being useful in supporting that process, then we need to be able to see that people use the app over an extended period of time as well. And that's a bit of a challenge, because if we look at the data on engagement rates with mental health apps, generally, what we find is that retention rates are not good. So there's some data there from a paper by Baumol and others with looking at engagement rates with mental health apps that showed that after 2 weeks, the engagement rates were only about 4% of those who started the trials, and 30 days, only a bit over 3%. So not very high rates of engagement, of ongoing engagement. There's other data around, particularly with health apps, that show that 30-day engagement rates tend to be around about 15 to 20%. What we saw with eRecovery was we had a continuing use rate. So we were looking at people who were using the app at least once every couple of days at the 3 months mark of around 50% of those who started the trial. So again, bearing in mind that not everybody who was offered the app took part in the trial, but of those who signed up for the trial, around about 50% of them were continuing to use the app 3 months after they started. We had a number of clients who were really quite long-term users. So about a quarter of all the people who signed up were still using the app 6 months after they started, and there were a couple of people who used the app for periods of well in excess of a year. The engagement rates for eRecovery are not bad in terms of what we would see with other kinds of mental health apps. There is some data from the HS version that showed higher rates of retention, but they were generally speaking for individuals with alcohol dependence issues, and we didn't manage to get to that kind of rate, but 50% is really not too bad. The reasons that we saw early exit from trials, so people who exited before that 3 month mark, were partly about privacy concerns. So a number of the people who were interviewed as part of the trial were concerned about the privacy consequences of using eRecovery, in particular the GPS monitoring, so the locational monitoring. There were individuals whose early disengagement was really about offending behaviour, people who'd been remanded in custody and no longer had access to the app. And then another major consequence in the trial was the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the pandemic came along about after the trial had been running about a year, and it had a really quite significant effect on a lot of the users. One of the things that we were interested in was what did people talk about when they talked about the reasons for continuing to use eRecovery over an extended period. So we've just extracted a few kind of themes out of the interviews that we did. So one of them was this idea that self-quantification was empowering. So self-quantification on the basis of the weekly surveys that people do in order to track progress, but people just talked about it as in part as a way of being able to check on themselves about how they were going on their recovery journey. That the journal keeping and the surveys and the messaging and so forth were, as one participant referred to it, as calibrating where they're at mentally, seeing if they're going up or down. So that idea of self-quantification was important. The sense of feeling connected through the app to others was another important reason for staying engaged. And interestingly, the idea of being connected was not entirely associated with the social media affordances of the app. So people talked about feeling connected just through the daily check-in messages that the app popped up every morning, that they were reminders that there was somebody out there who was travelling with them on their recovery journey. And then establishing positive routines. So these were things about using the app to establish daily routines that users felt were a positive way of organising their time and making it easier to continue on that recovery journey. So just to finish off, I'll just talk briefly about some of the things that we came up with in terms of the conclusions out of the evaluation. So the first one of these ideas is the idea that digital access is a really, really significant issue, particularly for this kind of population. Some of the greatest challenges in the eRecovery trial were ensuring that participants had regular and reliable access to the app. So some of these were the result of physical constraints on accessing the app as a result of lost or stolen or broken phones, or the lack of bandwidth or the ability to keep the phone charged. So these are constraints on digital access, but they're also reflective in many respects of the kinds of lives that participants were living. So this has been identified in other areas of digital development in the justice system as the problem of digital inequality, where people are cut off from routine contact with a range of digital channels and services that many of us just take for granted as part of normal daily life. But and we can see the most extreme form of this in people exiting prison who may have had only the most fleeting contact with the digital world while they've been incarcerated. So digital access and giving people the opportunity to have access to the digital domain and supporting them in that process is a really, really important thing if digital apps are to have a future in the justice system. The idea that daily routine and life management and self-tracking affordances were some of the most highly valued ones is an interesting one because it shows how using the app becomes part of the activity patterns of long-term users. So things like appointments and medication reminders and daily check-ins and surveys are identified by users as really important components of the way that eRecovery helps them to organise their lives in a way which may not have previously been available to them. So the value that users placed on personal information management also suggests that one of the important steps in addressing digital inequality is to provide users with access to affordances that have that kind of tangible assistance in their daily lives. So then finally, the question about what's the future of something like eRecovery in the court system more generally. One of the important issues here is that these kind of digital tools only work if people choose to make them work for themselves. So there were substantial dropout rates for eRecovery, even amongst people who had objectively had a high need for relapse support. So I think we have to think about how we both improve engagement rates for users within the justice system and the extent to which engagement rates can be made to work in the context of court supervised orders. So I think that's all I wanted to say at the moment, and I'll pass it over to Mathew.
Thank you, Stuart. So welcome everyone. I know you've probably had numerous welcomes. I guess what the aim of my part of this presentation, I guess, is to put a clinical perspective on this, and I guess to kind of indicate the reflections of the clinical staff who were running this on a day-to-day basis. So while there'll be a little bit of overlap, hopefully there's some additional kind of information that I can present just to show you what it was like from a clinician's perspective on using an app such as eRecovery. So most of the information I'm about to present is really a collection of information from all the clinicians here at the NJC. So I thank them dearly for their time in providing some feedback and my own reflections as well. So really, as I just said, the whole aim is to look at what do we learn from a clinical perspective in using eRecovery. Thanks, Alicia. Initially, there were a number of things that really stood out for us when we were reflecting on how we went about and how we did how we got this up and running. So I think you can see on the screen there, a number of key things stuck out really early on. One was, how do you sell it to people? How do you actually get people interested from the start? What is your sales pitch, so to speak? That becomes really important for that initial engagement with people. And I guess it's hooking people in as early as possible so that they can see that what you're offering them has a benefit and is actually going to offer them something and is not just a burden. So I think that right sales pitch is really a key, and that can kind of kickstart a whole process after that. Another thing that we noticed was having a champion. So that's kind of someone who you could go to and they would actually have used it and they were an advocate. And so they could provide some real world examples of what it was like to actually use the app for them. And then they could then almost on-sell that, if you like, to others who are a little bit unsure or not sure what it would be like. And that really gives that person some real presence because they're an actual user of the app. So for others who are unsure, that's really important. Obviously, any information that you use has to be clear, has to be easily understood, and really just providing those essential kind of bits of information initially. So you don't want to overwhelm people, which can be very easy when you're getting such a fabulous product, to be able to pare it back to the basics of what will help. We also looked at an incentive-based approach for people who did use the app. So we would offer things such as vouchers so that they could top up their credit. And that just allowed them to continue and to be able to use the app on a regular basis if their credit ran out. And that was really important. It also meant that if they had enough, they could be rewarded for doing things such as surveys or completing tasks. We would then give them further credit, which helped them to kind of embed that the app is an important aspect for them. It's always important early on to address concerns. And I guess this goes without saying, but one of the big ones we had early was the privacy and the confidentiality. Working in a court space, people were often quite worried what would happen with their information, and particularly one feature which was almost like a beacon button of when you're concerned or when you're worried and you pressed that, what would happen then? So who had access to the information if you did press that? So I think it's early on, it's giving them clear, articulate information that is easy to read and easy to understand. And it's about highlighting the many positives that they can get from the app. So it's highlighting that this has many benefits to their daily life, to their recovery, and to their journey longer term, so that they can see that normalising it is actually really part of what they can do. And I guess I've broken this into two kind of parts, and these are the opportunities that we discovered. So these are the opportunities we found that you could use the app actually in session with people. Although the app really focuses on the time when you're not with the person, it actually has some really cool features that mean in a session, it can be really important and really start to open things up for people. So one of the big things that people really loved was the visual representation of their recovery. So every week, people would fill in a questionnaire and they would chart their progress almost. And so on a range of measures. And one of those was drug use. So people could actually follow their drug use over time visually with a graph, much like you can see on the screen. And that was really, really powerful for a lot of people. So they could actually see that they were doing well, not well, they were tracking where they wanted to be, they were following their path, their journey, and their recovery was on track. Conversely, it also created great talking points. So if you were looking at the graph and you suddenly saw a spike up or down, it really starts to create well, what's happening there? So it was really a great point to be able to start opening questions and to start discussing with the person, has something happened? Is there something going on that's different? Because sometimes people's awareness of their recovery can be quite distorted. So this was a really good way to have almost an objective measure of how they were going. And seeing their progress in a graph was also great for motivation. So people would often say, I'm feeling really good this week. And you could point and say, well, look, yeah, I'm not surprised. You've had X number of weeks now where you've done really well. And you could show them the graph, and yet they could then begin to understand and they could see their journey a lot more. And that just really helped them to stay motivated and to stay on track with where they were going. Obviously, the app in session was really good because you could develop treatment plans that you could then put into the app. So it might be appointments that they needed for that week. It could be an important task that they need to get done as part of their treatment plan. And that's really good because it keeps it all together in one spot. And then it's easier for them to kind of adhere to that and to follow that. And it's also that the app can then remind them that these things are coming up. And I guess that ties in nicely with the last little dot point that you can see there, which is goal setting. And that's a fundamental component of recovery, is setting a target for themselves and being able to chart and monitor that. And the app allowed you to do that. So it really brought together a lot of those fundamental things that you can do in session, but you can use the app to do that. And it really can provide for people a great opportunity to see their recovery, but then also see their progress and where they're heading to. So that was really good. I guess on the other side is the opportunities between sessions, which is on the next slide. And so between the sessions, obviously, is where the app is really designed. It's designed for that time when we're not around, or you can't reach us on the phone, or you just need some extra help, or you want to do some extra work yourself. So the app had a range of different features. One of them was it could push out reminders. So it could remind them that they had to go to an appointment, they had a group on, they had to take their medication. It could be used for anything that they wanted to have a gentle reminder about. You could also use it for almost what we called homework, which was asking people to complete tasks or activities located within there. So that could be as simple as completing a relaxation session, doing some mindfulness, or reading up about a relapse prevention strategy. All these things can be built into the app so that they can carry it with them wherever they go, whatever time of the day, and they can just flexibly use it that way. It obviously is great because between sessions, they can then monitor their progress, such as in session as well. So they can monitor their goals, their substance use, and they can keep track of that. And that becomes really an important part of their longer term kind of progress. The other really cool feature, obviously, with this eRecovery app was that they could engage with their peers. And that's a really powerful thing. So we know that the impact of peers and the influence of peers is really great. And in recovery, having a peer that you can rely on and being able to engage with your peers is something that's really a part of that whole journey. So the app allowed them to do that through chats and through groups and through monitored kind of tasks that way. So that was really good. Obviously, another big feature that you can put into the app was a range of content on a range of topics. And it was really great because people could then access that information, such as how you manage depression, or how can I manage my anxiety, or it might be I need to find a local AA group or an NA group, and they could find all that in the app itself. And so information can be put in there that allows them to kind of access all of that. And that's really great. Another part which is really fantastic for people who like it is journaling. So there's an inbuilt journal in there. And the good thing with the journal is that no one else can see that except them. So they can journal their own thoughts, their ideas, their excitements, their disappointments, and they can put it all in there and kind of track how they're going with that. And again, it's another great way to kind of motivate themselves and keep themselves on track with their recovery. So there's lots of opportunities there for between group sessions, as there is for within group sessions. And I guess from what we learnt using the app between and within sessions, kind of then led to some of the challenges, which is kind of the next section that we'll have a look at, that also came up with utilising the app. So as you can imagine, it's a challenging environment. It's challenging to engage people at the best of times. And so I think that there's a range of things to have a bit of a look at here. I know it's already been mentioned that around things like the literacy levels of people. And that was something that really came up as well. So there was the technological literacy. So can I work a phone? Can I work an app? Do I know how to access things? And that's something to be really mindful about when you're looking at how or who you recruit into using such apps as this. Just making sure that at a basic level, people have enough skill to be able to manipulate through an app of some kind, which most people tend to, but I think it's also important to be aware of that there is a portion of people that will struggle with that. I think some of the other things that we found that could be challenging is the setting. So we're obviously a forensic setting, so that presents its own challenges in the first place. We know that this app has been used in a variety of different settings, some of them forensic and some of them non-forensic. So I think it's being aware of your setting and what are some of the unique aspects of working within your setting, and things such as privacy and confidentiality issues, no matter where you are always challenging. And depending on your setting, that may or may not impact upon things as well. Another big one we had was phone security and credit, which has been alluded to. So it's not uncommon that we would have clients that would have a new phone every week. So this becomes an issue because then you're having to reload the app onto the phone and get them back on it all again. And it's quite often they'll run out of credit, so they can't access certain bits of the phone. And how do I then do that? So I think phone security and credit becomes an issue. And we had a fair portion of our clients who would float in and out of homelessness. So that became a really big issue as well. I think early on we had issues with stability of the app. And those are just some of the technical challenges that come when you're implementing kind of new technology, and how does it interact and how does it work? And so I think the bugs in the system, once you can work those out, they kind of work themselves out. I think one of the big things, and one of the things that probably takes the most amount of time early on, is getting appropriate content. So the content for the app, what we found, needed to be localized, needed to be relevant, and needed to be really more focused on local issues. So the eRecovery app, when we got it, was an off-the-shelf product, and it was very Americanized. So it took quite a substantial portion of time trying to localize it all and input data and content that's relevant for local people. So that's something just to be aware of. That's a challenge that you'll need to spend a fair bit of time on if you're getting something like that, rather than custom building it from the start. I think this is my last one. So some of the other challenges I think also relate to how staff implement utilisation of apps and other technology like that. So how do we make the use of the app business as usual for staff? So how do we get them thinking that this is just what I have to do, rather than an added burden, extra work, just more things that I've got to do in my day? How can you make it just part of their regular routine, that they come in, they turn on their computer, they check the eRecovery, check how it's going, follow through with things? It almost is, how do you implement that from the start? And that's an important part of engaging the clinicians and everyone working together in a formulated way, and then working through the challenges that do come up. I think the other big challenge is monitoring the group chats. So that's quite intensive and takes a bit of time. So working out how you will do that, if you're having group chats, who will monitor it, how often, and what are your processes in place? I think having a simple sign-up process is a key. So there are obviously, at the start of most things, lots of paperwork you've got to do, but is there a simpler way to do it? Could you do it via video? Could you have to tick one thing that asks that they say that they understand that they're agreeing to? So I think it's understanding that there are different mediums can be used to kind of start a process to sign people up, rather than just the paper and pencil version. It's identifying suitable clients. So we took an approach where we didn't exclude anyone. So everyone, regardless of whether you were homeless, you had a home, didn't matter what drug type or how much you were using or how often, we included everyone into the trial. And maybe that had an impact on some of the results and some people's engagement. And maybe that's a question that, if you're looking at this, do you want to narrow it down? Do you want to open it up to everyone? If so, it's just understanding those implications of all of that. And I think that's just an important thing to kind of have right at the start. And as I've already said, it's making sure that clients have enough knowledge to be able to work an app. As silly as that sounds, and maybe having an app that's tailored towards the needs of what the client group wants. So a focus group who could say, well, this would be really good to have in an app, and being able to have some of those key elements. So those were some of the kind of challenges that we found as we went through. And clearly there were lots of opportunities and some really wonderful opportunities, but it's also being really aware that there are challenges ahead, and being able to adequately prepare and put together a process for being able to manage some of those. So thank you for your time. That was kind of my little section on the clinical implications of implementing this app for us at the Neighbourhood Justice Centre. So thank you, Alicia.
Thank you so much, Brooke, Stuart and Matthew. If you all want to turn your cameras on, we do have a couple of questions that have come through. So the first one that came in through the chat, oh, now I've lost my chat box. Bear with me one moment. Was just asking around if there was a focus on supporting the daily affordance of, I'm assuming, the phone and the application, do you think that would impact on recidivism or, I guess, reusing? Does anyone have any comments around that question?
I'll have a go at answering that. So, look, I think one of the things that's important to say about the trial is that this was not a randomised control trial. So it wasn't like there was a group of people who got the app and a group of people who didn't get the app, and we were able to make some kind of comparison about how the two groups went. So I think while there were clearly individuals who derived a great deal of benefit from having the app, clinical benefit as well as more kind of generalized lifestyle benefits, it's hard to say whether, what their trajectory would have been had they not had access to the app. So I think it's, like we're not at the point, I think, with eRecovery where we can make those kinds of comparative statements with any confidence, other than to say there were within that group who took part in the trial, there was a significant cohort who used the app for an extended period and appeared to derive significant benefits from it. And I think if you think about the way clinical interventions work generally, not all interventions work equally well for everybody. In a way, what you want is a system that offers individuals different ways of engaging with interventions that suit their own styles. And I think, this eRecovery has to be seen as, in that kind of a context. It's something that's right for some people, but not right for other people. I don't know, do you want to add to that, Mathew?
Oh, look, I would agree with you, Stuart. I don't think there's too much more I could kind of add to that one. I think you've kind of covered that really well.
Thank you. And we do have another question in the Q&A function. And if anyone does have any more questions, please pop them in there. We still have a few minutes to go. This question was directed at you, Mathew. So you mentioned the challenge of monitoring the chats between client groups. How did the NJC do this, and what did that look like for your team?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess there are a number of ways you could do that. We had a roster system, and we would allocate a staff member to monitor it 1 week on, and then they'd have a few weeks off. So there was around about 8 clinicians that were doing it. So about once every 8 weeks, you would be responsible for checking in on a daily basis, just to make sure that if anyone responded to the chats, that you could be there to monitor, curate it, and to kind of direct any conversations, and also to start conversations. Now that it can be quite time-consuming sometimes, and I think with a larger cohort, we also had discussions around whether you would outsource something like that if you had appropriate funds to do that, because ideally you would want to be checking it more often than not to monitor such a chat function. So I think that would be part of anyone's planning. If you were looking at that, then how would you do that? Have you got enough staff, time and availability to be able to adequately curate any kind of chat? If not, is there an external third party that could do that for you, that could be part of that whole process? So we would check it every day, and we would check it a couple of times in that day that we were doing it. Yes, it was open 24/7. That's a fantastic component about it. So people could connect with each other should they choose to. But obviously that has its own risks and challenges that come with it. So it's really about doing some risk management right from the start, having a clear process in place, and then being able to kind of follow through that process as you're going on. So it has many advantages, but also some challenges. So yeah, thanks, Alicia.
That was great, thank you. I did just jot down a bit of a question here as well that I'll ask, given we've got a few shy members in the audience today. But looking at sort of what you've discovered through this, this was a 2-year trial of the app, and there were, as you've all mentioned, there have been some challenges. But I guess, what do you see the future of something like eRecovery being used at the NJC ongoing or across other courts? What do you think that could look like? Open to anyone?
I'll have a go at that too.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks.
Look, I think one of the things about this whole landscape is that it's very, very dynamic. So when we first looked at eRecovery, 3 or 4 years ago, there wasn't much around that even remotely looked like eRecovery. And now there are actually other products on the market that don't necessarily fill exactly that space, but have some of the same kinds of functionalities. And it's one of the questions that I alluded to at the very beginning of my part was I think one of the big challenges about that face people in the justice sector is, there's an increasing array of this kind of stuff coming to market, and it is difficult to make judgments about which path you choose to go down. eRecovery is a particular kind of pathway. It's a very clinically oriented kind of pathway, but it's not the only digital platform out there that seeks to do those sorts of things. So Breaking Free Online was another one that I made reference to, which is not a mobile phone based system, but nevertheless it's a digitally delivered drug treatment and rehabilitation platform. So, this is not a kind of, are we going to use eRecovery or not? It's, where do we go from here? And I think there are some quite significant questions about how you integrate those kinds of digital drug treatment and relapse prevention applications in the context of court supervised orders, because again, one of the things that I was trying to get across in my part was these are not right for everybody. And so, it's the way court orders work is it tends to be, well, if it's on the order, you have to do it. Well, that's just not going to work for some people. So I think, there's got to be some thinking through about how you integrate treatment oriented interventions in the context of court supervised orders.
Thank you so much. And I will we'll leave it there today, just as we've only got a few minutes left, and I know our presenters today do have to get off to some other commitments. So I just want to thank everyone in the audience for attending today, and thank you, Mathew, Brooke and Stuart, for your time in presenting the findings and your experience within the speaker series. So thank you so much. And to our audience members, I will be sending an email out just with some follow-up from today and notifying you of when the recording will be available to share with any of your colleagues or anyone interested. So thank you very much, everyone, again, and have a wonderful afternoon.